Hi, today I'm going to be talking about global plastic treaty talks and kind of the consequences that it started. So basically, what are the global plastic treaty talks? So going back to Module 9, where we learned a lot about waste, the waste stream, we kind of learned about different types of waste, hazardous, toxic, we saw paper, cardboard, all that type of stuff. Well, today, kind of the issue that my project focuses on is plastic. And so statistic we learned in that module and that I kind of learned again doing my research for this project is that 20 million tons of plastic pollute the environment. And so, kind of because of this huge number, the United Nations Environmental Assembly actually mandated an International Negotiating Committee, or INC, to develop a legally binding treaty to end plastic pollution, which basically means a set of standards that all countries have to agree to try to limit this pollution and kind of create healthier, it kind of ties back to Module 7, to create healthier ecosystems. Marine ecosystems are very affected by plastic pollution. Animals eat them, and it's very harmful, and just to the fresh water we have left as well. So that's very important, and it's kind of the countries realizing this. So the session I'm going to be focusing on, the most recent session, was session 5.2, so it's the second part of session 5, and it was actually intended to be the last session, and hopefully a solution was going to come about, but that unfortunately did not happen, as I'll get to. So the most recent session, as I said, was session 5.2. It was August 5th to the 14th of 2025, so about 10 days, and it was very recent. So over 180 countries attended, which kind of shows how many people are recognizing how big of an issue this is. And it took place in Geneva, Switzerland, which actually has a lot of significance because Switzerland is very kind of well known for using they kind of reduce and they use a lot of more sustainable alternatives to plastic. And so that's one reason they held it. And another reason is just because they're kind of a sign for neutrality, kind of tying back many years ago. So this is actually a photo of all the countries and all the attendees gathering. So going into it, people hoped that there would be reduced production of plastic polymers. As we talked about in Module 9, the best way to kind of help the environment is just to reduce the usage of these kind of wasteful products. And people also wanted the countries to recognize the effects of plastic pollution. That kind of helps also point towards change. And they wanted to support development of plastic substitutes and ensure that the treaty is inclusive, which just means that it's obtainable for all the countries to get to, that it doesn't set kind of unfair precedents that some countries could handle and some could not. So the summary of what actually happened at the conference, there was about 10 days of negotiations and more than 2,600 participants. So 2 drafts were actually proposed. One was proposed on August 13th, and then a revised version was proposed on August 15th. So unfortunately, both were rejected and no resolution was actually reached. And the meeting was adjourned with no basis for kind of what the future could hold or what a future text that would be approved would look like. And the issues kind of were ambition. There were too many plastic measures put on, and no one was sure kind of how to finance all of the things included in the treaty. A lot of also oil lobbyist kind of countries that support that, they kind of started some obstacles during the negotiations where they would stall and they would veto the consensus. So this is a picture that shows weak UN treaty fails the world, which kind of just shows a lot of people's reaction to the failure of this treaty. So the aftermath, so no date has been set to actually resume the talks. And another issue was that more than 120 countries wanted a whole health article that kind of shows how plastic affects humans' health. There were also a lot of systematic weaknesses like loopholes in the treaty that needed to be fixed. And so with no limitations reached on plastic, plastic remains and waste levels are unchecked, which tying back to Module 7, kind of really affects marine ecosystems. A lot of this plastic waste is going into rivers and lakes and oceans, which harms all the animals. So the changes needed for a successful treaty, one would definitely be production limits, again, reducing that usage, and midstream reuse systems, reduce, reuse, recycle, very common phrase because it's very beneficial. There also needs to be health protections for humans working with plastic, which also goes into worker justice. The people who are working in these recycling plants and other types like this need to be cared for, and there needs to be trade and waste control as well as better compliance when the countries are working together to help everyone come to a solution. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned about the importance of the plastic treaty talks, and hopefully they'll be able to come to a solution altogether soon.